Looking at 21 through 27 speed run. 21 says on Friday, a server made 17 more than two times what they made on Thursday's shift. The total made for both Thursday and Friday was $179. How much money did the server make on Thursday? These questions where, 17 more than two times, those type of things can be confusing to write down. So you have to stop and think about it. So let's think of Thursday as X and Friday as Y. In order for X and Y to be equal, okay, it says 17 more than two times what they made on Thursday shift. So I'd have to take $17 away from Friday and make it equal to two times what they made on Thursday. So I've written that part of the equation. The second equation's pretty simple. It's just Thursday's wages plus Fridays equals 179. And what I suggest once you have those is to go ahead and put those in Desmos and look at that. And you can check the answer, which in this case says 54 for X and 125 for Y. You can check those to see, if I times 54 by 2 and add $17 to it, does it equal 125? It does. So those two equations do work. Okay, so you could check yourself if you made an error, maybe you added instead of subtracted 17. It would become evident when you look at your answer there. Okay, so how much money did the server make on Thursday? The answer there would have been 54. 22. A circle has points G and H on its circumference and point J in the center. I've drawn a picture there so you can visualize it on your test. You probably want to do that so you could do the same thing. It says the radius of the circle is 6 centimeters. So this and this here would be 6. If points GHJ make a triangle with a perimeter of 21, what is the length of line GH? So we're looking for this length. Okay. You're tempted there to maybe try to do the Pythagorean theorem or something like that, but we don't know if this is a right triangle. So really, the perimeter is going to be just those three side lengths added together. So, if we go 21 minus 6 minus 6, we do get 9. So A is your correct answer there. Looking at 23, a set of integers contains four consecutive even numbers. Okay, I've seen these problems before. I'm going to stop there. Let's think about this. Four consecutive even numbers. We're going to start with, x, that's the smallest integer, and then we're going to add 2 for the next one, then add 4, and then add 6. I've kind of laid that out there so you can see that. So when it says if the product of 4 in the third integer, okay, so my third integer there is x plus 4. I've kind of highlighted that there. We're going to say 4 times x plus 4 is greater than 58 more than the sum of the first and fourth. So you can see I've added the first and the fourth there. We're going to add 58 on there. Which inequality matches that? So I'm going to look at what I've written there, compare it to what is above, and it looks like D is the correct answer. Okay. The 58, they might have had that here instead of at the end. So you just have to be careful and read them accordingly. 24. This is probably one of the trickiest questions on this particular module. This says, so they like to replace actual numbers with variables and use the phrase constant. You'll see these types of things pop up quite a bit in those later parts of the test. This says the table above shows three different values of x with three corresponding values of y. The variable p represents a constant. Which linear equation represents the relationship between x and y? So we want to find the slope of this using the y minus y over x minus x, and we're just going to leave the variables in there, okay? So you can see I've done the 30 minus 22, which is 8, over x minus x. So p minus negative p, which would actually be 2p. And so this is going to simplify to actually 4 over p. That's my slope. Okay. And I look over on the left there, I do see some fours in there with my P's. Now, there you could use the point slope formula to try to plug this in. I think there's an easier way on this particular problem. I noticed that when it went from negative P to P, it kind of, I'm going to write it in there, they skipped a zero. Okay. So it went plus P, then plus P again, and then plus P again. Okay. And so if we look at the, over here in the Y, we'll notice that it went basically plus four. So this should say 26 plus four and then plus four. So my Y intercept there is 0.26. So if I want to say Y equals MX plus B, okay, then I'm going to say y equals slope 4 over p, and then I still have an x there, plus the y-intercept, which is 26, okay? And we'll notice that's starting to look a lot more like my options. Now, I want this in standard form, okay? So I'm going to move the x. So I'm going to subtract, I actually want to I want to get rid of that denominator. Okay. So if I were to multiply everything by p, okay. So if I multiply this whole thing by p, it's going to rule out that divided by p. Okay. So I'm going to have py equals 4x plus 26p. And notice that their answers are all in standard form with x on the left side. So if I move the x over here, I get negative 4x, okay, plus py equals 26p. We notice that my answer is A. Okay. Those types of problems, again, when they're using constants instead of numbers, the answer choices there look very confusing. But you notice once you follow your steps of finding slope using y equals mx plus b, it's actually not too bad. All right, throwing a little trig in there on the next one. It says analyze this expression. We have the cosine of 54 times the sine of 36 plus the sine of 54 times the cosine of 36. Okay, which of the following expressions would be the equivalent? Okay. Without knowing anything about trig, you could actually just put cosine of 54 into a calculator to get 0.587. It's an irrational number. And then you'll notice that when you punch in the sine of 36, you actually get the exact same value. Same thing with the other side. You get 0.809 and a whole bunch of numbers. And so you get the same thing. So you'll notice each of those is actually the same value. Okay. And so when I look at my answer choices, I'm definitely going to have a squared in here somewhere and not times two. Okay. So I'm looking at C or D. And now notice that to make it a little trickier, they've used this one first to say sine of 54 squared. So it could be C or D. And then they've actually used the sine of 36 squared, which would be D as my final answer. Now, if you want a little review of how sine, cosine, tangent works, just remember that it has to be a right triangle. Looking over at this diagram, I did kind of draw remember that the sine is equal to opposite over hypotenuse, and cosine is actually adjacent over hypotenuse. Because of how that's set up, okay, if you use 36 degrees, then you're looking at opposite over hypotenuse. But if you use the 54 degrees angle, you're actually looking at adjacent over hypotenuse. So you'll notice those are actually going to be the exact same ratio, therefore the exact same value. That is why that works out like that in your calculator. 26 says the cost of renting a gaming console is $42 for the first day, and then it costs $30 a day for every day after, which function shows the total cost C for the number of days the console is rented. Upon reading that, you're very tempted to to click B there because you have $30 a day plus $42 for the first day. But note that on the first day, it's really just $30 plus an additional 12 to get to that 42 total. And so the answer is actually D. Be careful with your answer choices and not being tricked there. And last but not least, for the following function, at what value of x does g of x reach its minimum? This is a quadratic. So you're going to have a parabola. And basically, we're wondering at what point this would be the minimum. Okay. And so that's going to have an x value and a y value. I would punch that into Desmos and let's see what we have. On entering it, I have my graph there. I'm going to just zoom in on there and notice that I have two values. The x value is actually what would I want to type in? Not the whole coordinate, but actually I would just want to say x equals 4, -4.5. That is the completion of Module 1. Thanks for hanging around, and I will be posting Module 2 very soon, and you can go through that for more practice for your SAT.